If you've been following along with my videos, you can tell that I have a theme going, and that's permaculture. So when I saw this book, Farming the Woods, an integrated permaculture approach to growing food and medicinals in temperate forests by Ken Mudge and Steve Gabriel, with information on forest farming in a changing climate, mushrooms, sugaring, ginseng, fruit and nut trees, and more. Well, that was very intriguing for me. So I got it and I read it cover to cover. It was written in 2014. So what is forest farming? By the way, it's great. I love the pictures, all the pictures in this book. It's quite beautiful. Well, it is one of 6 agroforestry practices designated for the temperate climate. There is a difference between forest farming and forest gardening. Forest gardening is the art and science of putting plants together in woodland-like patterns that forge mutually beneficial relationships, creating a garden ecosystem that is more than the sum of its parts. It's what I'm thinking permaculture is. Whereas forest farming is defined as the cultivation of crops under a forest canopy that is intentionally modified or maintained to provide shade levels and habitat that flavor growth and enhance production levels. And it is this forest farming that is the focus of this book. Historical perspectives on farming the woods. This was actually quite impressive to learn how even in the 1800s and early 1900s there were men proactive about planting trees, especially nut trees for the future generations, and how the natives long ago would control the land by fire. There is something to be said for that practice because nowadays the trees have a lot of diseases and ticks are rampant, but obviously not a practical solution since the population of people have exploded as well. Mimicking the eastern forest in a changing climate. This was a long chapter and he goes into real life scenarios about global warming and then projections on what it was going to look like by 2100. The biggest takeaway I got was that we need to start observing what is growing south of us because that is what will be growing in due time. This chapter is 63 pages long, so you know it's an important one. He gives all kinds of ideas as to what you can grow in the forest, but I must say he is East Coast biased. Even so, I gleaned a lot of good ideas, and I really must plant quite a few trees, or nut trees on my place. He highlights a family of nut producers in Minnesota that breeds thousands of trees by specializing in hazelnuts, chestnuts, and hickory. It is a very interesting read. This book is basically about the cash crops you can glean from farming the woods. So this chapter was all about mushrooms, which I am the most interested in for my situation. Although after reading this, it seems like an awful lot of work for a commercial scale. So I think I'll just grow some mushrooms for myself and see how it goes. He goes through the whole process, so if you know nothing about mushroom cultivation, it's a good read. I've read a number of other mushroom books, so I knew most of this stuff. However, he gave some good ideas about marketing the less than desirable mushrooms. You can dry them or make food products with them or tinctures to sell, but I guess you would need to check with your local laws about selling homemade goods and what's all involved. Anyway, this chapter has made me personally realize that selling mushrooms from your forest probably isn't going to happen, unless it's to a family and friends. But then why not just preserve them for yourself? Forest medicinals. This chapter got my hopes up thinking about growing medicinals in the forest like ginseng, golden seal, cohosh, bloodroot, fairy wand, and others. But then my hopes were dashed when he said that ginseng takes many years of growing before you harvest. And even though it is very good money when you do harvest, they sound like finicky plants, and deer and rodents enjoy them too. The other plants don't garner much money at all, so don't even bother to try to cultivate them for market. If you are interested in ginseng, he does a good job in telling how to grow it, very detailed, but for me it was quite discouraging chapter as far as making money in my forest with medicinals. However, growing them for yourself would be just great. Now this chapter I was into. I can see myself starting a forest nursery and making some money from seedlings. The authors go into good detail about what that entails. This is a pretty basic chapter on using wood for burning and the best wood stoves to get. Then he gives some ideas for other uses for wood, such as trellises or decorative branches or making baskets. I'll show you an example here. Talks about this guy that makes baskets. Some people are really clever with training trees into shapes. That takes a lot of time and patience, though, for the tree to grow, but definitely a unique talent and hobby. They also talked a bit about biochar and charcoal, but are on the fence about the practicalness of it. In this chapter, they talk about the benefits and disadvantages of having animals in your forest, but mostly it seems to be positive. Specifically, they talk about ruminants, but especially goats, then turkeys and chickens, then scratch birds, then ducks and geese. And don't forget the dogs and the pigs and work animals like horses and oxen. In my dream place, I'd love all of the above, but animals take a lot of work. This last chapter on designing and managing a forest farm draws from the case study of the McDaniels nut grove at Cornell University, and so you see maps of how everything was planted to give you ideas on how to start farming your own piece of land. And then finally, it's about how to use a chainsaw and cut down trees in your woods. Kind of a bittersweet end to the book, but I guess it's good forest management to take out the leaning trees or the deformed or diseased trees. So about the authors, I'll read you about these guys. First is Ken Mudge. He's associate professor at Cornell University, has been involved in agroforestry research, teaching, and extension for over 20 years. His domestic and international research has focused on non-timber forest products, including nitrogen-fixing trees, American ginseng, forest-cultivated mushrooms, and others. He teaches both on-campus and online courses in forest farming, plant propagation, and grafting. He is director of the McDaniels Nut Grove, which is the foremost center for forest farming education in the country. Mudge was the principal investigator on a Northeast SARE-funded extension project in collaboration with the University of Vermont and Chatham University that trained forest owners in shiitake mushroom farming as a business enterprise, and has recently published the guidebook Best Management Practices for Log-Based Shiitake Cultivations in the Northeastern United States. And he is the coordinator of the Northeast Forest Mushroom Growers Network. Steve Gabriel is an ecologist, educator, author, and forest farmer who has lived most of his life in the Finger Lakes region of New York. His personal mission is to reconnect people of all ages with the natural world and to provide the tools for good management of forests and other landscapes. He co-founded the Finger Lakes Permaculture Institute and currently works for the Cooperative Extension in the Department of Horticulture at Cornell, where he focuses on permaculture and agroforestry research and education. Along with his fiancée Liz, he operates Wellspring Forest Farm in Mecklenburg, New York, which produces shiitake mushrooms, duck eggs, pastured lamb, nursery trees, and maple syrup. So my final thoughts on this book is that it was pretty well written and I only found one spelling mistake. However, it leans heavily on the eastern half of the North American continent. For myself, living in the West, it sadly didn't pertain to me at all that much as far as things that I could grow in my woods. So I was disappointed because that was what captivated me with the title and why I bought the book. If it had given in the description that it was mainly for hardwood forests, I wouldn't have bought the book. However, if you do live in the East, then definitely give this book a read.